find yourself in a 20-year-old Nissan 240SX, this is how you would go about launching it. I found the best launch was about 3,000 RPM and then just dump the clutch. You'll get a bit of wheel spin, but that's okay because, you know. That's what these cars do. Now's about the time you'd hit the nitrous if you had some. And we've just passed 60, 8.6 seconds. And you can just listen to the wonderful sound of that 4-inch exhaust pipe as we get the vibration coming in pretty strong. Quarter mile, 16.5 seconds, 84.7 miles an hour. And wow, these brakes are terrible. 60 to 0 braking, best not attempted. But here we go anyway. A nice 157 feet from 60 miles an hour. And the 240SX around the figure 8 course. This is happening. It's still slow, that hasn't changed. Oh, we don't need to shift at a second, that's nice. Braking performance, not good. Seat support, not good. Understeer, everywhere. Oversteer, yeah, drifting, yeah. Open diff, not good. A lot of things about this car are not very good. You got a lot of roll, you have a terrible seat, but as long as we're turning right, that's okay. The left turns, you pretty much have to hold yourself in place. So it's nice, it's giving your abs an exercise while you go drifting. Yeah, get some!
There was the front-engine Ferrari 365 GTB4. The Daytona, as it grew to be called, to this day remains an icon for the company. There was the mid-engine Lamborghini Miura, arguably the most beautiful Lamborghini, if not car, of all time. And then there was the car that outsold them both, the Maserati GHIBLI.
That's a good feeling. That's a good feeling. This V8 almost feels lazy in comparison to the other Italian V12s, but it's such a cool powertrain considering what kind of car it's in. You have a broad torque range. You have over 300 horsepower or so, and when you rev it out to 5,500, which is the indicated red line, sounds really good. It gets some energy in the car. I really like the shifter too. It has a very good feel once you're about to get into gear. It looks kind of dopey, but the act of moving it from gear to gear feels really nice. I really like the ergonomics of this car too, because you sort of lean back in the chair. It's a very living room sofa kind of feeling. The steering wheel is really large and thin. And I love the design on it, this wood trim with the grooves cut in for your fingertips. It feels really nice. This isn't about limit performance. It's about not rushing to the destination, but enjoying the time it takes you to get there. These cars were around when it was a luxury to travel long distances, and that's why this car cost so much back in the day.
The GHIBLI isn't about outright speed or limit performance, but the enjoyment of the overall experience. The big steering wheel and long throw shifter like a relaxed pace. Get used to them, listen to that deep burbling exhaust, and you can fall into this wonderful trance-like state. That feeling makes you think of what it must have been like to drive from one villa to the other, taking all day to get there. And it reminds you that the personality of a car is more important.
Now, you might be asking yourself, why would they put those completely suicidal jump seats in the back? You know, the ones with the BMX handle grips. The answer is the chicken tax. What's the chicken tax? Well, in the 1960s, Germany thought we were kind of dumping our excess poultry on them, so they imposed an import tariff. to, you know, retaliate, our genius Congress decided to impose what we in the biz call the chicken tax, which is a 25% tariff on all pickup trucks not built in the U.S. This is why you get things like the amazing Volkswagen Caddy, which was like a Golf with a pickup truck bed, and of course, this guy, the Subaru BRAT, which has jump seats in the back, making it a, quote, passenger car. There are lap belts and a lot of probably dead people as a result. That said, they totally bolt right out, which is what I would imagine the majority of owners did about 17 minutes after getting their BRAT home. Right, so the BRAT, in conclusion, I mean, what a weird little anachronism of a car.
If you want to end up with a really nice looking wide body kit on your car, you go to a professional, you spend good money, and you wait till it's done. If you just care about tire clearance, you cut out the quarter panel, you rivet on your overs, and you call it a day, because there's more important things to do. So now you're probably wondering, with these brakes, with the suspension, with the tires, with the bodywork, why we've done all this.
Yeah, why don't we tell them?
Well, that's because of what's in this crate. In here is a 430 horsepower LS3 from Chevy Performance Parts. It's an E-Rod motor, so it's smog legal. We also have a T56 Super Magnum 6-speed manual, and at the end of this year, it's all going inside the car. Looking like it just emerged from the junkyard, we were eager to see how much of a difference the new parts made. Never mind that we hadn't checked the alignment or anything, we just went to the test track to see what would happen. It's a lesson we learned from our friends at Roadkill. Despite installing heavier and stronger parts, bigger wheels and brakes, we were surprised that the Nissan only gained about 33 pounds. That gain was worth it. Our best stop from 60 miles an hour dropped to 115 feet, which is a huge improvement from the 157 feet it took it when we first got the car. We noticed the rear brakes locked up before the fronts, showing that we're leaving some performance on the table. We were feeling pretty good about the braking performance, but then we went over to the handling track. There, the 240SX was simply hilarious. It's the definition of a momentum car. The 118 rear wheel horsepower means it isn't very fast, but it's so light and grippy, you don't really have to stop for corners. And even with those big sticky tires and no power, the chassis was still flexible enough to drift. So much of the Gremlin's peculiar design was the result of AMC's budget. It paled in comparison to Ford and GM and Chrysler's at the time. AMC couldn't afford to design a whole new platform, so instead they took the existing Hornet, lopped about a foot off the back end of its wheelbase, replaced it with this huge camback. Now up front, that left it with this enormously large nose and the strange proportions that ultimately personified this car. Now famously, the initial sketch of this car was done on an in-flight air sickness bag, and maybe unsurprisingly, we should have expected the result. Now under the hood and behind this grille, which is from a 1976 model, we have a 232 cubic inch or 3.8 liter straight six that when new was rated at 135 horsepower and 210 pound-feet of torque, though this is certainly making less now. Interesting old car tech tidbit, both the intake and exhaust manifolds hang off the same side of the engine, but not only that, they share the same bolts. Inside the Gremlin, you have a relatively Spartan interior by today's standards, but there are some clever features. For one, you have this nice tray that holds pieces of the exterior that have fallen off, like this bezel. You have a glove compartment that you don't actually have to reach over to open. You can just, and it does that. You have two gauges, one for the speed, one for your fuel and temperature, although neither of which work. Now, interestingly, cars from this era had funny names, Maddox or commands. The shift indicator is called torque command, which I guess is technically accurate, and the HVAC controls are the weather eye. Very funny stuff. I've talked to a lot of people who've owned this car or knew people that own this car, and they all loved them, despite the quirks and the problems and the way it looked. They all say it was a good car or it was a nice thing. I liked that machine for some reason. And it's an interesting thing to say that about what amounts to a cheap economy car. You
You have to appreciate the automotive industry, the giant, enormous machine that is the industry, for every once in a while producing cars that are just so different and so interesting because of why they're different. Well, yeah, it's not gonna make it. Well, Gremmy may have died, but we found a solution that gets it going from one place to the other still. And the best part, no hands required. I can just lean back and enjoy all this.
The immense machine that is the automotive industry can produce some simply astounding cars. But for every Porsche 959 or McLaren F1, you have cars on the opposite side of the bell curve. They're similarly interesting, but for entirely different reasons.